Start meeting, 7:35. Christine's on her way.
Bated breath.
As it should be. So our public hearing tonight has been postponed till next month. Perhaps, Mr. Gilbertson, can you give us any more information than we already have? Have we heard back from Bob Criswell at all?
We received the geotechnical information and we have forwarded that. It was actually given it to him in his hand. So we have not received back from him any information.
Okay, great. All right. So the next item on the agenda is to talk about we had a continuation for the general statute 824 referral. The town of Woodbridge, Connecticut General Statute 824 referral regarding the installation of a solar panel array at the Woodbridge capped landfill. And we have
Hi, Paul Keane, Deutsche Tico. We're the contractor acting.
Yep, thank you. And if you could just sign in there, thank you. And thanks for coming to talk to us.
Yep.
There was a bunch of questions last month, and so it was great that you were able to meet our schedule here. Does everybody remember the questions I had last month? I just want to...
I'm reading them right now.
There you go. Oh, you're reading the minutes. You're reading the minutes. There you go.
I'm just...
Well, actually, I think there were a bunch of good questions. I don't know what they were either.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to it. Here we go. Okay.
If it helps, I could just kind of talk about the project.
No, that would be
in
great.
general.
No, don't wait for us.
I have a couple items that are a little easier
no.
perhaps to see
Do not wait for us.
on the video.
Otherwise, you'll never get going. These guys will be ordering drinks.
Okay. This is a little askew, but I'll just use this. So what you see here in this green representation is essentially the landfill itself, provided from the topographical that you've provided us. On the bottom, you basically see Acorn Hill Road coming in. This is roughly where the Department of Public Works is, and this is the roadway going up to the ball fields in the north. The system will be a little bit smaller than this, because this one was shown at 1.6 megawatts. The total size that's been awarded by the state allows a project of approximately 1.35 megawatts in total. And they would be placed on the flatter sections of the landfill because obviously you don't want to get into the landfill cap, and we want to allow for access to the venting and the other various aspects of what you have to keep for the landfill. I'll just scroll down here a little bit to what we're basically talking about using is a pour-in-place system. It's essentially like a rubber bucket, if you will, that goes around the base of the system. You can see them right here represented, as well as here. Essentially then you have these panels on top, and you can pretty much see this a little bit better in this video. Let me just show you right here. So this is roughly what this looks like. So you can see the construction workers coming along. This is actually a pour in place. It's kind of cool, I think. They use this very large concrete truck to bring the concrete out into the middle of the field. That's one option. You can also use basically a bobcat that has an attachment. Essentially, you pour these in place, and these are enough to ballast the system down. And so just above their heads here is basically where the solar panels get mounted and racked into place. This happens to be one of the larger companies in the industry called Game Change Racking, but there are a number of competitors out there, and they certainly don't have the license on this. It allows us to kind of save on cost in terms of bringing in pre-poured concrete block or something like that.
So it's not a footing that goes 42 inches into the ground, it's just in a bucket that sits on top of the...
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That didn't look like it was on top of the ground. Those were on top of the ground?
Yeah, those are all on top of the ground. Let me just bring that back up. These are just sitting right, here is it? Come on. Doesn't want me to right click. These are actually sitting right on top of the ground.
I think on the Bass Pike, you see them, something like that, on the left-hand side.
Yeah,
right?
so they're sitting right on top of this aggregate here. Here's sitting right on top of mud. Essentially, they're designed to work with a certain pitch of the land, but beyond a certain pitch. So those areas that we kind of hadn't used, it kind of looks like an upside-down W or an M. Those are the areas that we wouldn't use, where it kind of is a little bit steep and you have runoff coming down off the landfill.
So they don't heave?
No, I mean, that's all part of the engineering process. You certainly don't want that to happen. I've seen that in several other systems that were not built by us, where you get actual bending and bowing in the rows, like, even a few months. So it's very critical to make sure that they're properly designed. So this is just one of the manufacturers. Some of the other questions that were brought up to me were basically, I did a little bit of a sketch here. Distance to nearby households and whether or not those areas would be visible. We've kind of looked into that. They're certainly at the closest point, 350 feet down here to the southwest, but you'd kind of have to go up the road and around the corner here. Same for these folks here. They'd have to basically look through the trees, across the ball fields to see even the back of the panels, and at almost 600 feet, they're relatively small at that point. And you probably shouldn't be able to see them at 860 feet through a forest. It's just probably not possible. One other photo, someone had asked me about what do these things look like from the back. Well, that's roughly what they look like from the back. These wires have not been strapped properly into place into the channels and the racking. Basically, there's what we call cable tray, so that they get basically tied down and they don't move anywhere during the entire time frame. At which point, certainly we could discuss some form of screening, some sort of appropriate tree for the local deer populations here. But those were I think the very high level questions that were put across to me to kind of prepare for this meeting.
So
They look a little prettier if you look at them from the front.
you put crushed stone down first and then you put the form?
Actually, I don't believe that we would necessarily need to put down a crushed stone here, but the forms go right onto the ground.
What's the potential for glare?
Glare. Generally, there isn't any form of great glare off the solar panels. There are any number of airports where they actually have the panels right on the airports. Of course, you have to do studies when we are within, I think it's at least 10 miles of the airport. So that'll certainly cover this area here. I did one study here in Connecticut previously, and they found that it wasn't a major glare issue, and that was within a half-mile of the airport. So that's definitely, the FAA is really concerned about glare and blinding pilots. And so far, we've done a few studies in Europe. That's not the United States, obviously, but we've never had an issue with glare over the long run for airports and public safety.
What about access to the testing wells?
As you can see, what we would try to do is basically either design around them. We can basically put breaks in between the rows, or if they would be in between the footings here, we would basically do what we have to do in terms of fire access, in terms of accessing the testing wells. That's part of the design process. As you can see, again, from this, let me just go back to this page here. The site, as we got from the topographical that we have, is good for about 1.6. So we should be able to have enough room with setbacks and other changes to the site, wells, whatever it might be, at 1.3, 1.35 megs, somewhere in that neighborhood. So this would be full use of the appropriate areas. I'm sure that we can even take it back from here to make sure we don't.
Do those horizontal lines represent the?
Yeah, they represent the rows.
Rows.
I could probably zoom in just a little bit. It's a big file, so.
So what about, it doesn't really affect it, but what about cutting weeds and lawn and things like that?
Generally, due to the height, it's not as much of an issue. You do mow it once or twice a year, but that's something that we would maintain as part of the long term.
What's your?
Yeah, so the project will be financed by the Connecticut Green Bank. They financed the project down at the JCC. They financed a number of projects around the state already, and that's who the long-term owner is going to be. So they've got a comprehensive policy from an insurance standpoint. It's fully wrapped. From a maintenance standpoint, it's taken care of by a company called True South Renewables. They have a very large portfolio across the Northeast, including Brookhaven National Labs down in Long Island, but a lot of commercial projects. They're handling the whole portfolio for the Green Bank.
So you sell the product?
So I do development. So, from the date we responded to the RFP, so through to the, the engineering and the permitting and the working with United Illuminating. In this case, one of the challenges on this project is that the state of Connecticut, in order to take the power that's generated at this location and credit all these public buildings, we're going to need to have what's called virtual net metering. And so that's something that the first select person, as well as a couple other attorneys and state officials, are working with the state to increase that capacity. So that hasn't, there's a certain annual amount allowed under law, under statute, that currently the utilities are observing. It's a total annual aggregate capacity of $2 million in what's called virtual net metering. That's what this project would be. Mm-hmm. That is currently, I understand there's legislation that will be proposed in January of the coming year to increase that cap from, 2 to 4. I have no idea exactly what the total capacity is, but there are currently about, 15 projects statewide that would qualify for virtual net metering with municipal facilities and just can't go ahead because they don't have that approved yet.
What happens when you get 2 or 3 feet of snow?
They're designed for the existing snow loads in this area. I think it's 35 pounds a square foot here. So we're designing projects for, we're doing a 6.5 meg project up in Grand Isle, Vermont, which is up in the islands in Lake Champlain. We just design the systems. You have to design the beams and the purlins and when you do your geotechnical analysis to figure out what's appropriate for that area. And it does increase the amount of steel that you use, the amount of reinforcement that you might use, the amount of spacing between each of the posts. Right. So in some locations, that has a lot more to do because they're driven posts with the actual, basically the grip of the soil, because these things are like big wings. So when the wind comes along, the bigger problem is that they get pulled out of the ground. Right. That's a concern over 20-25 years. Here we don't have that concern as much. It's more, snow load and obviously wind, but in a different way.
So is there like a 50 or 100 year storm that you go after in terms of the design?
If you go down to the JCC down there, the concrete was designed for 5,000 PSI. It didn't need to be anywhere near that, but that's a bit overkill. Those beams and spans are designed for the very horrible weather event.
I thought it was to put another building on top of the parking lot. I can't believe how much steel is down there.
Yeah.
I'm looking at South Carolina.
It was nearly a building.
South Carolina, 1 in 1,000 years, so I guess you might want to over-design it.
Yep.
Is that what they're saying? It's 1,000 years old?
1,000 years ago is when they had an event like they just had now with the wind.
Interesting. All right, any other questions?
No, thank you.
But just one thing, you say the people who maintain this will also mow around this? Take care of
Part of the maintenance would be mowing.
Is mowing? Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty standard for a ground-mounted system. It's not done all the time. I mean, weeds can grow pretty high,
No,
but
I understand.
they'll bring in like a brush hog and...
Yeah, what is the lowest height of the panel?
It's about, so what we would be proposing for this location is, if you take like a piece of paper, the panels are either in landscape, like your photography, or portrait, like the portraits that you've got. What we would propose is basically two in portrait, so 2 panels on top of each other. And at the lowest extent, it'd be about 3.5 feet. At the highest, it's about 6.5 feet.
So the panels are only 3 feet?
Sorry?
How big are the panels?
The panels are, it's about 3.5 feet, 3.5 feet wide by about 5.5 feet high. So So you're talking about a span of about 10 feet at a 20-degree angle.
Yeah, right.
So it goes from 3 feet at the low side to about 6 feet at the high side. And all the ancillary equipment would basically be mounted either on the piles or basically the concrete.
Do these
Or
things, are
foundation.
these things, do they move with the sun at all?
No.
They're fixed.
No.
So I always thought it was 30 degrees.
That would be.
I'm not believing you. I'm just.
No, that's technically more efficient. However, whenever you're designing a facility, you're trying to balance out is the optimal number of kilowatt hours for what you've built for a year.
Yeah.
So we would get the most total kilowatts out of a completely flat system, but we wouldn't be very efficient. And if we turn them at 45 degrees, we'd get a really efficient system, but there wouldn't be many solar panels out there.
Right.
So it's that balance between the two. It's anywhere from probably 15 to 25 degrees, depending on your latitude in the Northeast.
What's the replacement life for the panels?
The panels will easily last 20, 25 years. The component that gets changed out the most often is the inverter. So what we have is a string inverter. It's probably about half the size of this table and anywhere from 50 to 100 pounds each. Those get replaced anywhere from year 10 to year 15. They kind of have a lifespan that's somewhere in that neighborhood.
And is any of this stuff a cost to the town?
No. No, not until the kilowatts are being produced, then you would basically be, the way that it works, you're participating in a defined revenue stream. You get the equivalent of a savings of so many cents a kilowatt hour.
Cool. That's pretty.
It's going to be a cool project. It's going to take a while, but it's going to be a cool project.
How long does it take? That's a good question.
Well, not the construction. I would anticipate all of the permitting development should probably take through the spring, and we would look to construct next summer. I'm guessing, April, May would be a starting time frame, and it would probably take on the order of, I'd say, depends on how many crews of folks we've got, but 6 to 8 weeks to do most of the substantial work to where you'd say, hey, that's a solar plant.
Where do all the panels come from?
A lot of them, it depends. We have very good relationships with Solar World. They're a German manufacturer. A lot of panels nowadays are manufactured in China, in Malaysia, in Korea, in everywhere. And no one company produces panels all in one location. The components come from so many different places. There are some American manufacturers. Elon Musk, I'll give him a lot of credit, is building plants in Western New York. But a lot of those are for the residential sector, and that's the panel price there when he makes them for his own Solar City branded solar plants, it kind of comes out in the wash. So it doesn't affect the end cost all that much if his are 10 or 15 cents more.
All right. Anything else?
If anybody has any questions, I believe all my information is on file with the building department, so feel free to reach out.
Excellent. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Interesting.
That's cool stuff.
Yeah, it is. Now we need a wind farm.
People don't like wind farms.
I know.
They produce more electricity, by the way, but everybody thinks their favorite bird is going to be stuck on.
Thanks, everybody.
So, thanks. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the Robert and Maria Messina, 19 Diana Drive, application for a special permit for excavation, removal, filling, grading, processing earth products related to the residential site development at 19 Diana Drive.
John's here, just in case you need to. It needs to get scheduled for a public hearing.
Yes. So can we just do it next month?
Would it be possible, for the record, I represent Dr. Messina, sitting next to me. Would it be possible to set the public hearing 2 weeks from tonight?
I don't know. We can send out an email, but let's assume we're gonna do it the November 9th, second meeting. Assume we're doing it the November 2nd meeting, but we'll send out an email and see if we can get a quorum. Is that okay? So that would be the 19th. So Chris, maybe tomorrow we can just send an email and see if
Okay.
19th. Cool. All right.
That's it.
Thank you. Our work session has been postponed, obviously. Do we have to make a motion approval of the Town of Woodbridge 84 Acorn Hill Road? Is there a motion?
Yes.
Second?
Second.
You can't do both.
Oh, I thought he made the motion.
Al, that out.
One of the Allens made it, one of the Allens seconded.
Okay.
The AN made it and the EN
Take your pick.
seconded.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Excellent. All right. We've set our meeting. We have Leslie Crean's joining us tonight, and she's going to talk to us about what we talked about at the last meeting, as far as engaging her services to, and I wanted Leslie to kind of explain what we had talked about and get input from everybody. And we had, as I said last month, we did actually have a meeting and we talked about it. But I started off the conversation discussing what we had been saying, which was talking about the business district and the whole thing about the convenience store and the size, etc. So, and then we talked about the POCD and what the POCD is trying to do in the flats, and I mean that in a very positive way, because anybody from the flats is offended by that statement. So it's going to go into one of those Seinfeld, not that there's anything wrong with that. So this is Leslie Crean.
Hi.
Welcome.
So you've got your POCD under your belt. Congratulations. I know what an ordeal that can be. And you're looking at your next step, which rightly is looking at trying to make your zoning regulations enforce what the vision that your POCD has set out. So Jeff asked me to come and talk to you about what that next step might look like, and what you ought to start thinking about in terms of preparing for that. The way this usually works when I've done it is it happens in 3 steps. The first is, I know you did charrettes for the POCD. That's one of those words that often means different things to different people, so let me explain what I mean by it. It may be exactly what you experienced and it may be totally different. Doesn't mean that anybody's wrong. When we do charrettes, we do them, they're design workshops, and for the area that we're talking about, the commercial area of Woodbridge, I think it's concentrated enough and people know it well enough that a 2.5-day charrette, and that means all day for 2.5 days, 9 in the morning to 11 at night, straight through. I think that would be the optimal amount of time. It's enough time for for professionals to understand what's going on and get a feel for it quickly in the first half day, and then for participants, people in town who either own property or work here, live here, whatever, to come in and out as they please. We do a schedule with sort of the initial public orientation, explain what's going to happen over the next couple of days and how it works, and encourage people to float in and out over those couple of days. If you think it will take more than that, we should talk about that. I don't think you can do it well in much less than that. I think having a couple of nights for everybody to sleep on ideas is always a good thing, and we need a good half day anyway to come in and tour the area, see what's around, and literally take out our measuring tapes at different places and see what we're dealing with, because we're coming in not as familiar with everything.
Could you give everyone an idea of when you say professionals coming in?
Yes.
Thanks.
I work with, for a job this size, I'll probably bring in 2 or 3 architects or landscape designers. Some of that's going to come from what you all tell me, hopefully. Planners, a lot of architects/planners. I kind of pick who I invite in based upon what the interests and needs are of the municipality. So you're looking at a very concentrated area. You're not doing the entire, a 12-mile commercial corridor. So I think that can work very nicely with any number of combinations of people that I've worked with. But it's architects, it's, depending upon how you really wanted to get in depth, which I don't think is really appropriate for zoning regulations. We could do civil engineer, we could go whole hog, but I don't think that's what you're looking for, and I really wouldn't recommend it for just zoning regulations. You're looking at architects, planners, landscape architects. So the first of 3 phases is prepping for the charrette. That means we've got to do our homework. We've got to look at your POCD, read through that, see what your vision is, and then look at existing conditions and figure out, where we want to look at and what makes sense in terms of areas to change, areas to keep the same. Form our own opinions on those. Look at things like your variances. How many variances and what kind have been issued in this area? If everybody's coming in for sign variances, but they're not being issued, for whatever, I'll tell you, I'm the town planner in Hamden, and our ZBA almost never issues zoning variances for signs, because we don't want bigger signs everywhere. We've already got enough signs. So looking at the variances, usually over the 3 to 5 years, to look for patterns, it's a really good way to see what needs to be changed, or at least looked at. Look at your existing zoning regulations for the area. See if there are, I've already looked at it a little bit. I know you have a lot of zones in that one area. And there are probably ways to combine that so that if nothing else, enforcement's easier, and you start to create a more unified looking area. One thing I would caution you, though, is to remember that your zoning regulations are also a very forward-looking document. They're the forward-looking enforcement document. And we're looking at something that you're really not going to see what these changes are going to look like, barring some major development on a large piece of land, probably for 20 to 50 years. Many of us in this room may not be here to see it fully built out. Well, a lot of you may be. You can send us all a telegram. Yes, that was a collective one of you.
Don't let the gray hair throw you off.
Really?
Oh, trust me, I don't. I won't if you won't. How's that? So you're looking at creating a document that's going to carry you forward. Doesn't mean that it doesn't get changed over time, but you're looking at it with the idea of implementing the vision that you have, not just through the POCD, but then looking at what gets developed during the charrette itself. What gets developed is a set of plans that look at the ideal. It starts to talk about, for instance, I'm a design professional, I'm sitting here with a base map, a piece of tracing paper, markers, pens, pencils, erasers, and I got a bunch of people around me from all over the town who have different ideas about what this area ought to look like. I'm listening with a very different ear than they're listening to each other. And part of my job is to say, okay, I understand what you're saying, so if we did that here, that would make your idea work really well over here. It doesn't mean that we're not just scribes. We bring the professional education and training that we all have to bear on those decisions. If somebody comes in with a really crazy idea, I know, hard to imagine that that would ever happen.
Well, in this town.
I know I've told this to Jeff before. I can't remember if I told this story when I was here the last time, but we actually had a forum on what to do with our new town green once it was established, and someone seriously proposed that since we had a dog park, we ought to have a cat park. That is a wonderful idea to write down. And all the ideas get written down. Some of them just don't make their way to the final product. There is a selectivity, and as professionals, it's easier for us to take the hit. But I think that if you're going to spend everybody's tax money, I think, I could be wrong, but I think it's a pretty good bet that a cat park is not where you want to put it. So we also get to be sort of the middle person, middle entity. So the charrette itself is the second phase. We take all of the information that we get from that, we refine those documents. During the charrette, there are 3 public presentations, formal presentations. The first one is, this is what we're going to be doing over the next couple of days. This is what it's about. This is what we're asking from you. It includes a preference survey. What kinds of things do people like? What kinds of things don't they like? And then there's a midway feedback loop where we then make another presentation to the public, say, this is where we are, tell us where, if we're going off in the wrong direction. Like, it turns out that there's a lot of topography where we've put a ball field. Just as an example, it's been known to happen.
How do you get that information?
The ball field or the topography?
The preference.
No, the preference.
Oh, the preference survey. We actually, we'll put it together, and it has, again, some of that has to do with what you all tell me is important.
So you get that from us? Or you get that
No.
from
We put it we put together the preference survey.
Okay.
We put it together. If you tell me that there is a faction in town that wants very tall buildings, we might put a section, a piece in that says, of these, between this one and this one, which do you like better? Between this one and this one, which do you like better? That kind of thing. I'm guessing, I think it's pretty safe to say that that's not what Woodbridge is looking for, nor is it what I would recommend. So we'd be staying with, looking at smaller buildings, but looking at what we get from those surveys is not always obvious when you're doing them. But it tells us what kind of form of buildings people feel comfortable with. and where. We get lots of things from it depending on what we put into it. Are people vehemently against modern architecture? Not that you can zone for style, you can't. But part of the zoning regulations the purpose of the zoning regulations really is to create spaces. And one of the things that, I don't want to go off on this too far, but one of the most important things that zoning regulations do is they create the public space between buildings. People always think of zoning regulations as creating the parameters for a building on a lot, and it's people think about it in terms of the property lines to the interior. It does that too, but most importantly, in my opinion, other than protecting public health, safety, and welfare, zoning regulations help to define the space between buildings, which is the space that the public occupies. Whether it's driving down the street, feeling comfortable walking down a street, whether the purpose of that street is a major arterial to get you from here to there, or circulation within an area. So we'll be looking at street connections within the area, we'll be looking at sidewalk patterns. Those are not all zoning they don't all necessarily fall under zoning, but they are important to looking at the whole picture. So, does that make sense? Is everybody? So it's really the creation of the public space that is, in my opinion, the most important thing that zoning regulations do for a town beyond the protection of public health, safety, and welfare. So, first public presentation is to introduce everybody to the concept, explain what will be going on for the next couple of days, and then we break out into focus groups depending on how many people are there, and do the preference survey, which is pretty basic.
How are we getting people, and this is open to the whole town, obviously.
Yes.
Probably going to get the biggest impact of people from the people in that part of Woodbridge. So how are we communicating with them that we're going to be doing this?
I think we need to talk about that, whether that is, if you have emails for most of these people, if there is a town-wide way of communicating with them, if it's mailings, if it's, that's something that we need to work out. I will not be going door to door because I don't have the time and you don't have the money for me to spend the time doing that. It's not efficient. But, there are all kinds of ways of doing it, putting things up on the town website, any way that you would get, I would say every way that you got people to participate in the POCD or at least know about it, and then some.
So
something in the newspaper.
Put that list together of things that we should do.
Oh, sure, absolutely. I recognize this is not something most people ever do, and most people who do it only do it once in their life. So no, I will not be looking to you to reinvent the wheel.
So you go through our POCD for that. Let's assume we're picking that part of the town.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like make a list and look what we're trying to do, and then come and talk to us and try to get a priority list a little bit from us.
We can do that. I think some of those things may.
And I guess a lot of it's already given by the fact that we've approved a POCD.
And some of it will. Some of those ideas will, depending upon how many people mention them at the charrette while we're sitting there talking about block A, B, or C, those things tend to come out. The amount of work that gets done during a charrette, just remember how you're feeling right now, because the amount of work that gets done at a charrette is mind-blowing. absolutely mind-blowing.
And more, there's more involvement, there's more stuff that comes out of these charrettes than the one everyone's been to.
Okay, I wasn't there, so like I said in the beginning, everybody has their own definition, and it's like, you know, a friend of yours who's 55 years old invites you to a birthday party. When adults have birthday parties, you never really quite know what to expect. It's just a little different. So
I hope so.
it's I've done this several times before. I know what I'm doing, and the most important thing is to get people there and their input. Again, sometimes we take their input and it manifests itself in a plan, and sometimes we say, thank you so much, that was great, and we move on to an idea that's feasible. And we bring a lot of common sense to this. This is not draw pretty pictures about things that can never ever happen, that are just not practical. Because the purpose of it is to come out with documents from which we write the zoning regulations. So you get through the charrette. We take some time after the charrette to refine the drawings a bit, and just because remember we're talking about marker on tracing paper here. And so we take those documents. In the middle of the charrette, we have a feedback loop. Are we going in the right direction? We make any, course corrections that are necessary. And then at the end of the charrette, we do a final presentation. Say, these are the things that came up. These are the schemes that we have based upon what we've been told and what we've worked through in terms of what priorities are with the people who are around the table. And then we take some time to refine all of that. I don't tend to do, unless you really want it, I don't do a report at that point back to the commission, a formal report, a written document. I find people don't read them anyway, and there's no point in spending that kind of time. I would rather spend that time putting together zoning regulations that will actually implement what it is that you've all said that you want, and spend the time tweaking those. I think it's I think it's more efficient and a much better use of your money and everybody's time. It all, it's a much more efficient way to operate, in my experience. So, and then that's the third phase, is drafting those regulations, meeting with all of you, making sure that you all understand exactly what it is, obviously inviting the public to these meetings for questions and explanations. They look different. Form-based codes look different than use-based codes. I tend to do a hybrid because I think there are things to be gained from both types of codes. Form-based codes tend to talk about the form of buildings and how they relate to each other, and I think that's critical. But use-based codes talk about what uses are next to each other or on top of each other and where you can have them, and I think that's critical as well. If you want to take a look at a larger example, you can look at the Hamden zoning regulations. They're available online. These are the most recent ones that I've worked on, and I work on them and with them every day. And I have to say, they've been in place for 5 years now, and and we knew we were going to have amendments. We actually referred to them as the chicken amendments because we had some people come in during the charrette who wanted us to deal with the issue of people being allowed to have chickens, and there were some people who were for it and some people who were opposed to it. And we said, you know what? It deserves its own hearing. And we didn't want to bog down the process that was looking at a much bigger picture. And so we did have our own. It was the most entertaining Planning and Zoning Commission meeting that I have been to. I have to say everybody was very good-natured about it. But you can take issues that can either be very divisive or don't really contribute to the big picture, and you just take them and say, okay, we're going to deal with them, but we're not going to deal with them with this. So we've had amendments, we knew we were going to have them. There's nothing wrong with that. These documents should be fluid. But my job is to make sure that you've got the basics, the bulk of it done. Questions, comments?
Timeline for this would be, how long would it take for you to do the review? Phase 1, let's call it. Because you broke it down into basically 3 phases. Phase 1 being review, charrette, then drafting the regs. How long each phase do you think would take?
Probably take us about, from the point at which we obviously sign a contract with the town, about 2 months to prepare, look through your zoning regulations, look through your POCD, get base maps. You know, I live on the other side of the tunnel. It's really easy for me to pop over here and drive around. I know the area anyway. My only concern with that is that sooner rather than later, I don't want to, it doesn't make sense to try and do this in the middle of December. It's just, like I said, let's start with being practical. So we'll have to work that out, but let's do something that makes sense. Let's not just say 2 months to prepare, because, that's what I think it will take. Going through the variances, honestly, is probably the most onerous piece. It doesn't make sense to try and get everybody out when they won't come out. They're all going to be shot.
Curious about the amount of time.
Yeah, so about 2 months for the first phase. The charrette itself with, follow-up kind of stuff, I'd say probably roughly a month. The charrette's 2.5 days, but trust me, there's a lot of, we all need a good night's sleep afterwards, at least one night. And then just polishing up the document, being able to have something to show you, a series of maps and ideas. It's not that there's no written report, but there's not, we don't sit down and write a magnum opus for it. So, and then drafting the regulations to a certain extent depends upon the complexity of the ideas that are generated during the charrette. If there's a general consensus that one area should be one thing and everything else is something else, you end up with you basically end up with 2 zones. It all depends upon what comes from that. You could end up with 1 zone with a variety of factors. It really depends on what comes out of the charrette. Could end up with 10 zones, although, I hope not to. I have to administer these things all too often, and I know the more zones you have, the more difficult it is to enforce and administer. So,
how do you handle the issue when a certain property owner purchases a piece of property thinking that he'll be able to develop X on it, then after the charrettes, there's a new proposed zoning change where he may not be able to do that anymore?
You can always develop based upon whatever the current regulations are. If you have a permit for a use already, that permit stays in effect depending upon what kind of a permit it is. If you say a special permit, that permit is good for 5 years, regardless of what happens to the zoning regulations afterwards, and they can ask for an extension. And that law is, depending upon where we are with the economy, the state legislature's changed that over time, but used to be 5 years, then it was more than that. And so you can always get a permit, and that permit is always valid for the length of, for however long that permit is legally valid for. It doesn't, intent never changes what somebody can do. If someone wants to, let's say somebody wants to put in a a pharmacy. If they can do it today, they can do it today. If the zoning regulations that you all adopt in the end prohibit that, if they have an existing permit, they can do it. If they don't have an existing permit, they can't. Zoning regulations are in fact a forward-looking document. They say this is what we want for our future.
Didn't we have that discussion, you weren't here, but I think we had that discussion about pharmacies and marijuana regulations the last time we were here. It's a different subject.
But I will say, I don't think I don't think the goal is to really do that, right? I mean, it's not like we're taking something that could be a subdivision and say, or that you could put condos, say you can't put condos, or vice versa. I don't
But
think
if you're looking to
I don't think the
consolidate,
area of that town, I mean, there's still business districts.
right,
So, but I hear what you're saying, and I think it's I don't think that we want to do that.
I think you find it in setbacks, side yard, front yard.
Anytime you make a change.
Yeah, and you know, the new regs obviously control. So what you're going to do is you're going to heighten the desire for people to get variances, whether they're granted or not, but that's what you might do in addition to what you've said over there.
That can happen. I think that what you'll find is that in commercial districts generally, the goal is to make them more economically desirable.
Exactly.
And so, in order to have a place be more economically desirable, you generally want to allow more building, but in a way that parcels and buildings work with each other. And you also may, in all likelihood, are going to want to look at how height is affected. Because for a host of reasons, environmental reasons, cost of construction reasons, just the size of a parcel reasons, parking reasons. You're better off, if you want to make your property deliver the most it can in terms of income and in terms of tax production, which, by the way, you guys can't take into account, but when I've got just a planning hat on, I get to take into account because it's important. It's an important part of planning. A parcel will deliver the most in terms of income production for the property owner and for improving your tax base if you have the most building on it that you can have. Well, that has to get balanced with the parking requirements, that has to get balanced with setbacks from adjoining properties depending upon what those uses are. We have areas where we changed them to a 0 side yard setback so the buildings were pushed together to help define a street wall because we wanted that street to feel much more walkable. And if buildings are way back, they don't feel as walkable. And I do a whole thing on this the first night to sort of, lots of rules of thumb with lots of examples of why and why not, and what kinds of things can work and what kinds of things can't work or don't work well or haven't worked well. Maybe somebody else. I am always learning from these
But that
experiences.
0 side yard is a very interesting concept, and certainly in terms of the limited area that we have, may have some utility down here. I just wonder, generally speaking, because obviously you've done this around before you've come to us, do you find that the developers who may come in to get the most economic value out of their parcels actually give you the ideas that you then need to work with so that you can refine or redo some of the zoning regulations? I mean, for instance, like a 0 side yard.
I have to say that the ideas like that came from our charrette.
They did.
That's where, we basically said, this is the feel that we want, these are the things that we want, these are the things we want to accomplish. We want to be able to have Just another example. The market demand right now in terms of housing, and this is all over the country, is for millennials and empty nesters. They're the ones that are leaving where they're living. They want rental apartments in walkable areas. That's the market. And so do you look at a building that is a 1-floor commercial building and say, that's all we want to put here? Or do you say, wait a minute, we could triple the square footage of that building and however whatever your tax formulas are, and the property owner can then make, theoretically 3 times as much money and put flats above it. That does a couple of things, a couple of really important things. One is, if one of those floors gets vacated for whatever reason, the entire building isn't vacated. So that entire building, it may lose a third of its income producing value and some of its tax generating value, but it doesn't lose all of it as it would if it was just that 1-story retail and nothing else. It's one of the strongest arguments for mixed-use buildings. The other thing is trying to get buildings to be built so that you can change out the uses within them over time, so that, for instance, a first floor could be used for retail purposes for 10 years. The market then changes, and there's a greater market for commercial space or for residential space. Instead of having to take that whole building down and build something new, you can convert that space. And a lot of other things fall into this. I mean, pretty much anything having to do with sustainable development, use of products, how far products come from anywhere. Just the idea that you're reusing a building and keeping it around and building it so that it lasts for 100 years instead of 20.
So could I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
So I know that the purpose of your being brought here was to concentrate on the downtown area, so to speak, but everything you're speaking about deals with buildings. And of course, we've got one major building in town that has been the subject of lots of controversy and lots of discussion. And I know it's right on the front burner in terms of the selectmen. And I'm wondering whether or not you think that part of the approach you're talking about might be able to be utilized in addition to that downtown area with respect to other parcels, because that appears to be something that, at some point of time, it may incidentally come to us, but I think just generating ideas about use and reuse of parcels is very important. And it's not just the zoning regs in the downtown area, because that's kind of the end result, but it's, generating these ideas.
I think ultimately you have a responsibility based upon the fact that you've redone your POCD recently.
Yeah.
I think you have a responsibility to look at your zoning regulations for the entire municipality. I think the question is, what do you want to bite off first?
Well, I'm just saying that's a current issue, and I don't want to negate that, despite what some other people may think. I'd be very eager, because I know that there's a working group between the selectmen and between this commission that's kind of looking at this one large building, trying to say, geez, what do we do with it? And those of us who are probably just lay people, not really involved in that process, have a lot of thoughts on that. And I'm wondering whether or not part of a charrette might be able to deal with that. I'm not sure what anyone else might feel, but that's front and center.
My own take is that we've talked about the Village Country Club.
What's that?
I'm assuming. Anyway, I think that we actually, as a commission, and as far as the POCD, we have actually addressed the Country Club of Woodbridge. Hear me out. And I think that we've given some direction from the commission and from input from the charrettes. but I also think it's been put back in the selectmen's lap, and they're dealing with it. And I think that they have to deal with what to do with that piece of property.
But just like we're a commission, Joe.
Okay, hear me out. Let me finish.
Sure, go ahead.
I appreciate it, but as opposed to a really, I think all of us agrees, the biggest potential area in town is the whole business district. I mean, the town's looking for more taxable income, things like that, and this is the only part of town. We're not going to like suddenly start going into other parts of town and saying, okay, instead of acre and a half lots, we're going to do 3/4 acre lots, kind of thing, to increase density. So in the business district, that whole area, I like the idea of calling it the downtown, by the way, so I think it's great, has the most potential as far as doing that. It has the most area that can grow and change. So I think that's why, and I think that a lot of that became apparent all of a sudden when we had to like approve a gas station at the gateway to coming into town. So I think that to me, for us, is more of a priority. The property that you're talking about is exempt from zoning regulations, so the only thing we can actually talk about at a charrette is what we think is a good idea, but the idea of bringing in a planner was to go the next step. And so I'm hoping when we get done, we'll actually have zoning regulations for this area. We can't actually do that for that other piece of property.
No, and I guess my comment would be that although they're currently exempt from zoning regs because of the imminent potential for development in lots of different ways, it just seemed if you had an appropriate expert planner, you might want to suggest that maybe they might want to look at sort of a little outside information that could come in from a planning perspective that perhaps we didn't address. And I agree that there's a priority of downtown. But, we have limited property owners. I think one of the things that this town has is a lot of that undeveloped area is in very few hands, okay? And that's neither good nor bad on its face, but, it may be somewhat limited in terms of what goes on. Again, back to this idea of, you have buildings close together. What do you do, as you say, with the public space? Again, I'm just a lawyer who's represented other towns, but I've got a little sample of how it can work in that work. So, my suggestion would be that that would be an area of focus. Well, we do have zoning regs for all of this downtown. I mean, they exist. Just a question of how you're going to tweak them in light of the POCD.
They don't actually work. The other thing.
How can you say that? That's a bold statement that isn't correct.
I don't agree. I think it is correct, and I think that's
the zoning regulations of our town.
I think they're not very good. They're not very good. They're very dated, and there's a lot of things to be changing. Okay, so and as far as the other piece of property, I'm not disagreeing with you, but unfortunately, the town's only given us a certain amount of funding, and so I guess. I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just saying that I think that we probably, from my understanding, have enough funding for the downtown area, and I think that, I think in our next budget, we should suggest that I hope that they continue to fund the position, and I agree that that should be the...
Well, maybe they can have an independent discussion. That's always possible too. I just think it's as poignant an issue as the downtown, and it's much more immediate.
I think we should do ourselves a favor and try to stay away from that thing right now. But I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
Any questions? Just note that there's really not a lot of variances that you're going to have to go through because...
Except for signs.
Except for signs, but we've changed the sign regulations, but you can look at that. Within the past year, we've only had 2. And they're residential, they're not down there. So, that's, just for the sake of whatever, there's a minimal number of variances.
Excellent.
They're easy to find, and by and large, most of them are residential.
And signs.
And signs prior to your sign regs.
Right.
And you've changed the sign regs, and since then, we
Right.
haven't had that. So-
One.
Hmm?
One's in.
Well, we've had one. We have one coming in.
That's music to my ears.
So. And I guess the other thing would be to, and I gather that would come out in the charrette, is that we do have 2 residential areas that are down there that were all based on earlier subdivisions from like 1898 there and whatnot. So you've got, obviously, lots can get combined and whatnot, but they're all basically developed, and unless you decided to have somebody come in and buy a bunch of houses and take them down.
Well, there's a lot of potential down there, actually.
Just saying, you know.
Not necessarily in the residential part, there's a lot of commercial areas down there too.
This, I gather, will also include what we call the village district. Meaning physically
Yeah.
that area.
Well, I think we have to look at all of it.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Over by the West River.
Well, the village district encompasses your 4 business districts.
Right.
Your general business district, which is the western side of Amity Road, your B&I, which is the eastern business district between Amity Road and Litchfield Turnpike over to the West River, so where the gas station was just approved. And then you've got Dev 1, which is just north of the residential C district, which basically is along Bradley Road. And then your Dev 2, which is from the West River over to West Rock. So those are your 4 business districts, which are currently in the village district.
But can I just follow up on that suggestion that we need to have residential sort of merged with commercial uses? I mean, is there anybody here who thinks that's not a good idea? I think we've talked about that at the POCD level, right? And so it's in there, it's in our document. And I just think that, for instance, we have this active adult plan developments, right? That's in our zoning regs.
Yes.
And they're located where, Chris?
Currently, Dev 1.
That's right, so it's in a Dev 1, which is sort of a
It's a
business area,
commercial
right?
district.
How many do we have down there?
Active adult?
Yeah, active adult plan
Currently.
development.
I don't know that you call Brighton Gardens an active adult. You have none.
We have none, okay? So what I'm saying is we have a zoning reg that was drafted 2006.
We have an approved permit.
Right, we have a permit, but no one's building, there's gotta be a reason why, and some of that has to do with, I think, what was delivered tonight.
Had the permit came in and wanted to make it non-adult.
That's correct. All I'm saying is that, you know, the reality of what people are doing, whether or not it's the millennials or anybody else, are gonna tell you where people are gonna spend their dough, okay? And obviously, if we have, that may be one of the regs that doesn't match up with what the reality is. All I'm saying is there's a few of those, I don't think there's as many as we might think, but that's one that's a concern. I thought, and also this idea of, you know, we hear about the 55 and over, right? They said, well, you've got it down there, you know, you shouldn't put it anyplace else. And, you know, we kind of addressed that in the charrettes, but no one's built it out yet. So there's got to be a very good reason for that.
Well, we also talked about other things in the charrette. We talked about multi-use. We talked about buildings where there could be 3, 4, 5-story buildings down there. We talked about putting retail on the ground floor. We talked about putting
Which is what a lot of places have, and Hamden has,
above.
for sure. Yeah, well, I agree. All I'm saying is, where we have to update, I mean, that's great, but one of the concerns was where we have separate zoning regulations identifying like an active adult community and looking at where we actually have put it. If it doesn't work, then maybe we've got to think about it.
Well, that's the point. That's what we're doing.
It doesn't limit itself to that particular downtown area, I guess is what the point I was
No,
getting.
but it's the entire downtown area.
I think he's talking about the fact that it might.
It might go on another parcel of the land.
District.
That's what I'm telling you. Okay? All right.
So we look at all of these things. We have, we talk about lots of alternatives. We talk about things that we have either experienced, implemented, as I said before, things that we've seen that work, that don't work, that can work better one way rather than another way, and why, and are there things about Woodbridge that, would push decisions about zoning one way or the other. Every single place is unique. You can't just pick up, regulations from one place and plunk it down on another place. It just doesn't work. We use the word calibrating when we talk about zoning regulations, and we use that very deliberately. We are looking at, for instance, a zone that is primarily residential in form-based code is typically referred to as a T3 zone. I'll explain T-zones in 1 second quickly. But a T3 zone in Woodbridge might look very different, in all likelihood look very different than a T3 zone in Hamden or in New Haven or in West Haven or in Orange. They all of these zones have their own character, and the goal is to manipulate it so that the regulations fit the character, but the character then fits the desired character then fits with the zoning regulations. Just quickly on, it's a 2-second thing on form-based codes. You're used to the zoning regulation, to the zones as you have them named. For form-based codes, we use what are called transect zones, and it's, very briefly, it's a T1 through a T6. T1 is land that has never been touched, that you don't want touched, like state parks, things like that. T2 is open space, like farmland, cemeteries, golf courses, places that are basically open space but have been manipulated, and that you want to keep the way that they are, or you want to allow that activity. T3 is generally what we call suburban. It's residential. The best description of a T3 is it is a killer place to go trick-or-treating. The houses are close enough together, you can walk from one to another, front porches and porch lights are on. It's a great place to go trick-or-treating. T4 is usually more of a mixed use, retail commercial uses on the first floor with residential or commercial uses above. T5 are your more densely urbanized areas, and T6 is, a place like New York City or Philadelphia. I'm not proposing New York or Philadelphia for Woodbridge. You may end up with a T6 that is totally different than that calibration. We don't have a T6 in Hamden. We go up to T5. You may only go up to T4. Again, that's the kind of thing that we work through when we listen to what you all have to say, what the citizens of Woodbridge have to say, and we work those things out. We do recognize that there are other parts of Woodbridge. This is not, the commercial area is not the only area. We understand that it has to work with the adjacent uses and the adjacent properties. And one other thing is, we can't, just like you can't, we can't make anybody build. We can just say, if you're going to build, these are the rules. This is how you have to do it. And those rules, hopefully, are to the benefit of everybody.
Did you take into account what we've been hearing on the exit issues for the merit?
Sure.
That would be important, I think, also.
Sure.
Well, we have zero.
Well, at this moment, but we have, this sort of a
We hear a lot.
timeline that, and they're talking about loops and,
Yeah,
so there's
exactly.
lots of things
When
out
I see
there.
something, I'll believe it.
Right. I just get concerned that all of a sudden, we got this great plan in place and here comes the state. They just did it in downtown Derby,
It can happen. Let's remember, 9th grade civics, state trumps town. That can happen, and that doesn't have any, that's not a reflection on the amazing zoning regulations that you will all choose to implement. But it's actually, in a way, it gives you, I think, one more piece of ammunition to go to the state with and say, look, we've actually looked at this stuff recently, and this is not what we want, this is what we want.
I don't know if the people who are in the south side of Main Street in downtown Derby, I think they tried to do that and were somewhat unsuccessful because the state just took all that property within the last 2 weeks. And there's going to be an expansion of Route 34 apparently into a 4-lane road going through Main Street, Derby.
No way.
Really? Very much away. I'm sort of immersed in it on behalf of someone, so. And I just had to look at the plans.
Be some major serious stuff.
It is, and then there may be some development closer to the river, where they have a river walk and all, but you don't know. And I guess what I'm saying is, those take a lot of, time and effort to put them in place, but now that we know that we've got some options, that things are going to be happening off the exit, just sort of take it into account.
All right. Excellent. Anything else?
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, do you think you could identify, or perhaps Leslie, you could identify that intensive, it sounds like an intensive 2.5-day period of time that all this would happen, and how would we be able to gain that critical civic involvement that you would be needed for that?
Everything that you did for your POCD to get people there, and then some.
Is there any way to use the rather considerable resources that were put at that POCD to use in this effort?
Oh, I hope so. I mean, one of the things that we do during that period before the charrette is we read the POCD. We may be, other than all of you, we may be the only other people that do, but we read it. That's where we take the beginning of our lead from. So we're not going in blind. It's just, and we tour the area. When I said we literally take our measuring tapes out, we literally do take our measuring tapes out at times. So we look at all of that stuff, just like we look at the existing zoning regulations. We try and let everybody who's done work, good work, before, we work off of that. We're not interested in reinventing.
And is there any way, what you're saying to us is that you're not advising us to consider changing our zoning regulations based on the previous charrette or the POCD, but on the new charrette? Charrettes are required before writing zoning regulations?
Well, the base that she's going to start from is our POCD.
Okay, but we need another charrette between the POCD and the zoning regulations.
That's what she said. And I will tell you that I will tell you that is the part of Woodbridge that was most vocal at the charrette. So I think that, but we've got through it, and we have a POCD, and for better or worse, it was accepted because the comments that were made, we addressed, and it seemed to work. So I think that this is a new level, and so I do think that people in that part of town are going to show up, because I think they're very concerned, and there's a lot of, just like before, there was a lot of misinformation, but we did get from A to B, so now this is, the idea is to get from B to D and A, B, C, D. So I think that, I almost think this will be more, it should get a good turnout, because I think that at the end of this, there's really going to be a result, as opposed to the POCD is a vision. Now we're saying, okay, we're going to move from the vision to this is what you're allowed to do, or this is what we think you should do. So I think that when it gets to the point of the end result is this is what you have to do or get to do, I think people will show up.
Can I just,
I guess I get confused though, because it sounds like you're talking more uses, what you're allowed to do, and you're talking more spaces and what it's gonna look like in 40 to 50 years. So I'm confused about
Actually,
what.
I'm saying exactly that. I'm saying the exact same thing. What you just described is exactly the same thing.
Okay, because it sounds total, and I have to say, this is totally foreign to anything I've ever done. The concept of going through a charrette to get to a zoning reg, especially when you already went through all that mechanism to get to a POCD, just seems like I'm not too sure where. The other thing I guess I would want to mention is that last week, the week before, there was an attempt to have a meeting down in that area.
No, let me tell you, a meeting was held.
A meeting was held.
I think Mr.
And
Gilbertson was there.
And Mr. Gilbertson was
Not a
there.
very happy meeting.
It wasn't on television, was it?
I don't think so. We didn't need the television.
I read a letter
So-
about it in there.
Given that, I don't know how the charrette is, if the charrette has to be in only one area, because there was some concern about the fact that it was held down, it was not held up here, it was held down there. On the other hand, what was the access in terms of, ADA accessibility?
I think the optics have to be right. I mean, you have to.
And whatnot. So it's something where you may need to explore multiple venues rather than just one, because it's a town that, as much as it likes to be one town, it has two very strong factors to it, I think.
Well,
And somehow it has to be overcome so that everybody kind of comes to the table without the chip on their shoulder, and let's just sit down and focus on what positive things that we can do, because it doesn't sound like that was a very positive thing that was
There were
experienced.
parts that were great.
Yeah. So
part
anyway.
of leaving.
So-
From my understanding, I don't know the details.
And I honestly don't know that there's a place down in the flats, downtown, whatever you want to call it, that you could actually, accommodate a large number of people to come.
Well, I've done. I think of the Iroquois.
Irondequoit.
Irondequoit, yeah, exactly. In New York. It was in the winter. I know that, and they did have a space, but ignoring that, you are actually out there, and that actually broke up into, teams. I don't know, maybe there were 4 or 6 teams, and the people in the town showed up. Not a huge number, because everybody kept going in and out, but at the point where people did their walks, and with the people that are being paid, and you're listening to people that are being paid and what their input is, you actually came back and we created plans, and then we pretty much would take the plan and go back outside and walk around the areas that we just drew plans for. So I know I don't know all the details of why there was a lot of contentions about having the meeting downtown for that, but what we're doing, I hope it's mostly down there, to be honest with you. But who knows? It could be up here, obviously. But it is kind of nice to be having a informal discussion with a group of people, and then say, okay, actually, let's go out there, and you go out there, and people get it when you're standing there, and you say, well, you could put this building here, or you can put it back 60 feet. You won't even know there's a building there. For instance, people standing there, they go, oh yeah, you're right. So that's the idea of trying to get it down there.
I'm just trying to say, logistically,
No, I
we may really need to.
understand. No, I'm
figure
agreeing.
out-
I'm agreeing with you. I'm just trying to explain it a little bit more.
Yeah, because we don't ever get anywhere positive if we're all yelling instead of listening.
Yeah.
I can tell you that I have, I've done several of these at this point, and they're fun. Even when people are standing around a table disagreeing with each other, which happens, but they're fun because it's creative energy that gets generated. And the design professional's job is to mediate some of that and say, okay, this is a great idea, but it only works right here because, for instance, was at a charrette where there was talk about the water supply. And it turned out that there was a stretch of of a river that had been put underground through culverts to go from point A to point B. And a whole neighborhood was built over that. Nobody even really knew it was there, except for a couple of people who'd lived there for their entire life, and maybe, sometimes I wonder if they had a couple of lives back there. They knew it was culverted. And so there was talk about daylighting this water. Well, suddenly that completely changed the nature of the conversation around this table. People got excited about the idea that there could be this river return to literally going through a parking lot in this case, where people had been concerned that there might be some huge, horrible building built, and then how could you use that? That's where the creativity comes in. Now, will that ever be daylighted? I don't know. But the ideas that got generated around the idea of keeping part of that space open and not built upon, those ideas for how to build around that open space, whether there was water in it or not, that's what became the exciting part of that plan. There are always surprises in these things. 99% of them are good. The good thing about having design professionals come in who are not from Woodbridge, who don't know the town intimately, as everyone who lives or works or shops downtown does, is that we all get to see it with fresh eyes. We see connections that you may not have. That's what happened with ours. I'm so glad that when we did ours in Hamden, that it was people from the outside who came in, because they saw things that we didn't see, and they were phenomenal ideas. Some of them are being carried out, some of them may never be carried out, and some of them, may not be carried out for 15, 20 years. It's a hard thing to explain and to imagine until you go through it, and then you say, oh yeah, and then you realize you can't explain it to somebody else either, even though you've been through it. But it's fun. We try and make it fun and creative and reasonable.
Well, it will be a gun-free zone. Hopefully.
Not to talk to crews.
Anything else?
All right.
If anybody has questions or anything, I'm more than happy to, answer them. Email's the easiest way to get a hold of me. Jeff has my email, so I'm happy to give it to anybody. Okay?
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Great.
All right. Terry, I have a quick question. I don't know when we get to ask this. So I was on North Racebrook Road the other day, yesterday.
Okay.
And one of the, thank you, one of the parts of the approval for the houses that Mr. Olson was putting up
Yeah.
was to keep the stone walls and the trees along North Racebrook Road. And yet I see on one of the lots, it's been completely cleared. So I'm actually a little concerned about that, because North Racebrook Road is one of those roads that is pretty continuous.
I'll look into that. I believe that was done post-closing after he no longer owned them.
Well, that rule doesn't go away.
I'll look into it.
Okay.
I'll
cool.
report back.
I was just thinking about whether I saw a for sale sign. There is a sign up there though, so it may be
They're
that
both
I feel
closed.
they both closed.
Yeah.
Well, I mean that's kind of disappointing since we went through great pains to try to keep
I
that
think there were stone walls along the back side.
along the road too. Along the road too. But you're right. I'm kind of curious about whether they kept those as well.
I'll look into it.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, if you go down there, you suddenly see why we wanted to keep the stone walls and the trees there, because it looks like a different town when you go by that house.
I have a question regarding how you want to do the meeting next month. You do have 2 public hearings, and then we had also invited Bruce Hyde from Clear to come and talk to you. Do you want to have a brief special meeting, like at 7, for them to come, so that you can just go into your 2 hearings, rather than have people come at 7:30 expecting hearings and then have to wait through Clear?
What are the, other than Lucian Street, what's the second one?
The second one is also earth removal, fill and regrading for
The one
19
you-
Diana.
The one from 19 Diana.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that's the one you're counting.
Which had asked for 2 weeks.
Right, they've asked for 2 weeks, so we may not even be doing that then.
But do you still want to have Clear come and sit through? I mean, I'm anticipating that we're going to have a fairly long hearing process with comments and whatnot on one
That makes sense to me. Coming at 7.
Because I don't think that they're going to have a very long discussion
I
with
have
you.
no problem coming in at 7.
It's actually not that easy for me, but how long does Clear need?
They're just going to go over what they would do for you in terms of looking at the regulations for,
So
their
why
aspect of it.
why don't we do something like they do at the Board of Selectmen meetings or the Board of Finance, I don't know which one does it, where they say, at this time, we're doing X, we're gonna start the public hearings at X, so that people who are coming for the public hearings don't need to come early. It's not that easy for me to get here before 7:30. As you can see, I barely get here at 7:30.
I haven't done a legal for next meeting. I mean, that's another
Yeah.
option that we've got, is I can just say in the text of the thing that the public hearings will start at 8 rather than 7:30. Is that what you would prefer? I mean, that's another way to do it. I just logistically don't want to have a room full of people waiting through.
Is that okay? I mean, otherwise I'm just...
We want you here, Jeff, so.
I'm sorry.
That's okay, but I mean, I'm just saying, it's a legit question. It's a way to handle it.
I think that, I agree, people probably don't want to sit here and listen, although it's too bad, but they don't.
So I'll do the legal to say starting at 8, and then we'll do,
Just confirm it with him that we actually need a half hour with him.
I'll ask him if he only needs 15 minutes or whatever he needs, and then go based on that. Okay.
Cool.
All right, because I just didn't want to,
No, I think it was a good point.
okay, thank you.
All right. So we have on here approval of the minutes, but I'd like to put this off to next month because I'd like to read these.
Good.
That's okay. I'm going to hold it. If that's okay.
Absolutely.
Asking for a lot of things tonight.
I know. As I said that, I thought I'm really pushing the envelope here, so I'm sorry about that. All right. So is there anything else? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
All those in favor say aye.
Who seconded?
I'll second it.